At 11 minutes past midnight, a brass bell rang in the archive basement. Vale looked up from the box she was cataloging. The sound had been clear and near, though no bell hung anywhere in the room. Dust shifted in the lamplight. Above her, the old archive settled into its familiar creaks, a board complaining beneath its own weight, a pipe clicking in the wall, the faint sigh of wind against the high windows. She waited. Nothing followed. The box lay open on the catalog table. It was narrow and deep, made of dark wood, with a brass clasp gone green at the edges. A label had once been tied to the handle. Most of the ink had faded, but 3 words remained. For the night line, Mara had found it behind a row of rolled survey maps while searching for a register of vanished villages. The box was heavier than it looked. Inside were letters arranged in neat bundles, each envelope bearing a name and a station: Bellwether Halt, Alderfen, Lantern Cross, St. Auras, Juniper Vale, Stillwater. She had searched the archive maps. Bellwether Halt was absent from every current atlas. So were the others. The old railway plans showed a line passing through the northern hills, but no record explained where it began or when it had closed. Mara had read only the first line of the first letter. Dear Elian, I am sending this before the first snow, though I know the post will be slow. The handwriting was patient and slanted. There was no address, only the name of a station she could not find. She had meant to put the letter back and continue in the morning. Instead, she had stayed until midnight, copying the box contents into her notebook, checking dates, comparing maps, and trying not to think about the way the letters seemed to have been waiting for her. The bell rang again. This time a vibration followed it. The floor trembled beneath her boots. It was not the archive's heating system, which had been disconnected months earlier. It sounded like a train passing far below the town, a low, steady movement through stone. Mara placed both hands on the wooden box. The clasp opened by itself. Inside the lid, beneath a lining of faded green felt, was a folded timetable. She opened it beside the lamp. A dark line crossed a gray map, beginning at the town where she stood and winding north through country that had no roads. The first departure was listed as 12:20 a.m. There was no date. At the bottom, in small black letters, were 2 sentences. Letters may be carried without charge. Passengers may remain until they are ready to return. Mara read them twice. She had always trusted details. Details could be measured, filed, and checked. A missing date could be found in another register. A changed place name could be matched to an older map. Even a vanished village could be reconstructed from tax lists and weather reports. The timetable offered no such comfort. Yet nothing about it felt dangerous. The paper smelled faintly of soot and cedar. The line on the map was dark and precise. Someone had drawn it with care. The vibration grew stronger. Mara gathered the letters into the box and slipped the timetable into her coat pocket. She turned off the desk lamp, leaving only the green-shaded light beside the stairs. The shelves rose around her in the dimness, full of ledgers, parish books, maps, and names that had survived because someone had taken the trouble to keep them. At the top of the stairs, the archive door opened without resistance. Outside, the town smelled of frost and chimney smoke. Street lamps made small amber pools on the pavement. The clock tower stood above the roofs, its face pale against the dark. Mara walked downhill toward the old station. The ordinary railway had closed nearly 20 years earlier. The station stood beyond a row of linden trees, with boarded windows and weeds between the rails. During the day, children rode bicycles along the platform. In winter, snow filled the tracks until the place looked like a narrow white road. Tonight the gate was open. A lamp burned beneath the station awning. Mara stopped at the edge of the platform. One door in the station building was lit from within. Above it hung a brass clock. Its hands pointed to 12:20. She heard the train before she saw it. The sound came through the darkness as a measured rhythm, metal meeting, metal. A low breath of steam drifted along the rails. Then a locomotive emerged from behind the linden trees, its headlamp shining like a warm star. It was black, rounded, and polished, with brass fittings and a tall chimney. 3 deep green carriages followed. No smoke hid the windows. No driver leaned from the cab. The train stopped exactly beside her. The nearest door opened. A man in a dark railway coat stood inside. He was neither young nor old. Silver touched his temples, and his face seemed familiar without belonging to any memory Mara could place. "Miss Vale?" he asked. She nodded. "Your letters." Mara lifted the box. The conductor accepted it carefully. He checked the clasp and placed it on a brass table beside the door. "Will they all be delivered tonight?" Mara asked. "They have been waiting for tonight." "Where does the train go?" "Along the night line." "That is not on any current map." "No," he said. "It is not." He stepped aside. The carriage was warm. Frosted lamps hung from the ceiling. The seats were brown velvet, worn smooth at the edges. Wooden panels gleamed with the soft polish of old furniture. A narrow shelf held empty cups. Mara climbed aboard. The conductor closed the door. The train began to move so slowly that she watched the platform remain beside her. The linden trees passed one by one. The clock tower receded behind the roofs. Then the ordinary tracks ended. Mara saw the rails fade beneath the snow. Beyond them lay a meadow. Yet the train continued, gliding over a silver line that appeared only where the headlamp reached. She sat beside the window. The conductor placed the box opposite her. "Bellwether halt first," he said. "Then Alderfin, Lantern Cross, St. Auras, Low Marrow, Juniper Vale, and Stillwater." Mara opened the box. "Who are the letters for?" "Those who are named." "And if they are no longer there?" The conductor looked toward the dark fields. "They are there." The train moved through hedgerows silvered with frost. The windows reflected the lamps, so that Mara saw the carriage repeated in the darkness, warm and floating. She leaned back. For the first time in many years, she had nowhere she needed to be when morning came. The train gave a small, familiar sway, carrying the box and its patient names into the night. Bellwether Halt appeared at the end of a long curve through the hills. There was no town visible at first, only a wooden platform, a signal post, and 3 lanterns beneath a roof of weathered shingles. The lamps were protected by blue glass, and their light fell across the snow in 3 round pools. The train slowed. A woman waited beside the station sign. She wore a dark red shawl and held a folding umbrella, though there was no rain. Her white hair was gathered at the nape of her neck. Mara checked the first envelope. "Eileen Bell, Bellwether Halt, Mrs. Vale?" she asked. The woman smiled. "No." Elian. Mara handed her the letter. Elian held it against her shawl without opening it. For a moment she traced the crease with one finger. "It came from Tessa?" she asked. "There is no sender's name." "That is all right." She tucked the envelope into her pocket. "Would you like to read it here?" Mara asked. "I have been reading it here in my mind for years." The words carried no bitterness. They belonged to the quiet platform, the blue lanterns, and the hills beyond. Elian led Mara into the station waiting room. A stove warmed the small space. A kettle sat on its iron top, and a calendar beside the ticket window had not been turned since October. "Tea?" Elian asked. Mara accepted a cup. The tea tasted of mint and lemon balm. Through the frosted glass she could see the platform and the train, its windows glowing warmly in the snow. "Was Bellwether once larger?" Mara asked. "There was a village on the hill." "Where is it now?" "Still there." Elian pointed beyond the window. When Mara looked closely, she saw lights scattered along the slope. A path wound upward between stone walls. Smoke rose from several chimneys. "The village is small," Elian said, "but enough people remain to keep the lamps lit." Why was the line forgotten? People stopped using it during the day. Then roads were built elsewhere. Maps changed. And the night line, it continued. Who keeps it running? The people who have reason to travel. Eliane said this plainly, as though the answer required no further explanation. The conductor appeared in the doorway. "We have 8 minutes." Eliane rose. "Come, you should see the bell." Behind the station, beneath a stand of fir trees, hung a large dark bell. Its surface had been worn smooth by weather. A rope descended from its handle and disappeared into the snow. "Does it ring when the train arrives?" Mara asked. "It rings when someone remembers the way." Eliane rested one hand against the bell, but did not pull the rope. Below them, the village lights shone along the hill. Steam moved between the trees. The train waited at the platform. Mara thought of the letter in Eliane's pocket. "Will you open it tonight? When I reach home? Do you know what it says?" "Not all of it." Eliane smiled. "That is why it was written." They returned to the platform. "Are there people at the next stations?" Mara asked. "Yes. Will I find every recipient?" "The letters know where they belong." "That sounds convenient." "It is." The conductor held the carriage door open. Mara climbed aboard. Eliane stood beneath the blue lanterns as the train began to move. The woman lifted one hand. A bell rang behind her, one note, then another. The sound traveled over the snow and through the dark hills. Bellwether's lights slipped behind the fir trees. Mara returned to her seat. The conductor placed a paper cup of tea on the table beside her. "Does every station have a letter?" she asked. "Not every station. Does every letter have someone waiting?" "Every letter that arrives." The train passed through a cutting in the hills. Stone walls rose on either side, dark beneath the frost. A brass chain tapped against the window frame in time with the rails. Mara lifted the next bundle. Alderfin 5 letters lay inside. One was addressed to Ruth Mallow, another to Peter, a third simply to the house with the green door. One bore a pressed fern. The last was addressed to the keeper of the alder bridge. The conductor glanced at the bundle. "Peter will be first," he said. "Do you know them all?" "I know the places." "Who are you?" He looked toward the dark glass, where the carriage lights floated over the reflected fields. "I am the conductor. That is your work, not your name. It is the work I was given." Mara waited, but he did not elaborate. The valley opened beyond the cutting. A river appeared beside the track, reflecting the moon between alder trees. The conductor returned to his fold-down seat and opened a newspaper. Mara watched the water move beside the train. The box had been waiting in the archive. The letters had been waiting in the box. Now the night line carried them toward their recipients with the calm certainty of a road that had never truly vanished. Ahead, beyond the river, a green door waited beneath a lantern. Alderfin had no platform. The train stopped beside a low stone wall where a narrow footbridge crossed the river. Lanterns hung from the alder branches, and their reflections trembled on the water. The conductor carried the box. Mara followed him down the steps. At the far side of the bridge stood a cottage with a green door. Someone opened it before they reached the path. A man in a wool cardigan stepped outside. He was broad-shouldered, barefoot, and wrapped in a blanket. "Peter?" Mara asked. He checked the envelope she held. "That will be mine." He accepted the letter and looked at the handwriting for a long moment. "I had forgotten its shape," he said. "Would you like to open it?" "Not yet." Through the open door, Mara saw a table set for one and a kettle steaming on the stove. "Ruth is my sister," Peter said. "She left when she was 19. She meant to return before the first frost." "Did she?" "No." He held the letter against his chest. "She sent several. This is the last." He opened it beneath the lantern. His eyes moved across the page. When he finished, he folded the paper carefully. "Ruth says the first snow came late that year," he told Mara. "She says she kept the blue scarf. Do you have it?" "No, she does." He looked toward the river. "That is enough." The next letter belonged to the keeper of the bridge. A woman emerged from a small house carrying a lantern. Her face was lined, but her eyes were bright. "This is from my husband," she said when Mara handed her the envelope. "He had been gone 22 years. She did not say how, and Mara did not ask. The woman placed the letter beneath the glass of her lantern and walked to the center of the bridge. The river made a small continuous sound below. The third letter was for the house with the green door, but not Peter's. The conductor led Mara along a path between hedges to a white cottage with a porch crowded by clay pots. An old dog slept beneath the steps. A woman opened the door before Mara knocked. "Is it the letter from the orchard?" Mara checked the envelope. Yes. The woman accepted it with both hands. The house smelled of bread and apples. A fire burned low in the grate, and wooden birds stood along the mantel. "I'll read it when the bread comes out," she said. "Will it keep? It has kept this long." The fourth letter, marked by a pressed fern, belonged to a schoolteacher beyond the river. There was no school now, but a narrow stone building remained behind a hill of grasses. A man waited beside it with a shawl over his shoulders. He removed the fern from beneath the string. "This was gathered along the old path," he said. "Do you remember the path? I remember walking it. Is it still there? It is if you know which direction to take." He tucked the fern into his pocket with the letter. The fifth envelope was for the keeper of the bridge. When Mara and the conductor returned, the woman stood with the letter open on the stone rail. She was not reading now. She was looking at the water. The conductor called softly, "There are other deliveries." As they reached the train, Peter came from his cottage. He had the letter folded in his hand. The woman from the White House arrived with a paper-wrapped loaf, and the schoolteacher brought a small tin of tea. The keeper of the bridge did not come. Instead, she lifted her lantern high. Its light moved once across the dark water. The train began to pull away. Alderfin receded in pieces. Green doors, gold lanterns, the river slipping beneath the hills. Mara placed the bread and tea on the table. "Are all the stations like this?" she asked. "No two are alike. Are they all absent from the maps?" "Most." "Why?" The conductor looked out at the valley. "Maps show where roads go. They do not always show where people remain." The train climbed through wooded country. Snow lay on the bare branches. A sign half buried in the drift announced St. Aura's. There was no road leading toward it. The station stood on a wide plain beneath a sky full of stars. A tall clock rose from the center of the platform. Beneath it hung a yellow lantern. No one waited outside. "Where are the recipients?" Mara asked. "At home. Will they know?" "They always know." The waiting room held 7 clocks, though none showed the same time. A table stood beneath them with 7 envelopes arranged in a circle. Mara placed the bundle there. A tall woman named Hester came first. She opened the letter beneath the window and read it slowly. Then came a clockmaker carrying a stopped pocket watch, a child named Leo with a wooden horse, and the woman who left flowers beneath the station clock. The person with the yellow curtains arrived smelling of soap and cedar. The one who knew the song but not the words hummed a single note while opening her envelope. The last letter bore only a blue circle. Mara looked at the conductor. "Who is it for?" "Someone who has not arrived yet." The station door opened. A woman entered carrying winter branches. A small blue circle was sewn at the cuff of her coat. She saw the envelope and smiled. "That is mine." Mara handed it to her. The woman read it beneath the nearest clock. When she finished, she folded the paper and pressed it to her lips. "What did it say?" Mara asked. "That I had not been forgotten." She tucked it into her coat. Outside, the clocks began to chime. They did not chime together. One sounded, then another answered from farther away, then a third joined, lower and slower. Mara returned to the train with an empty box. The conductor cut the loaf from Alderfin and poured tea from the tin. They ate while the clocks continued behind them, each note finding its own moment. "Do the stations remember the letters?" Mara asked. "The people do, and if everyone forgets, then the line carries what remains until someone remembers again." The train moved into the long valley beyond St. Aura's. Lanterns marked the track ahead. amber, blue, green, and white. Mara watched them appear one after another in the darkness. The line was not a road to somewhere hidden. It was a promise that distance, age, and altered maps did not make a person unreachable. The thought settled warmly inside her. The train carried the empty box toward the Valley of Lanterns. After St. Aura's, the railway entered a long valley. Lanterns hung from posts along the track, each burning a different color. Amber, blue, green, and white lights marked the way through the snow. They did not illuminate much. Between them lay broad stretches of shadow, but Mara always saw the next lamp before the previous one disappeared. The train moved slowly. Snow crossed the windows in diagonal lines. The loaf was gone, and only a few crumbs remained on its paper. The conductor had returned to his fold-down seat with his newspaper. The carriage held only the two of them, though distant movement sometimes sounded in the far compartments. Mara did not investigate. The night felt full enough without being explained. They passed Willowmere, where a silver cat sat beneath the station bench. At North Window, the line crossed a wooden bridge above frozen grass. A narrow stream below carried colored reflections through the reeds. The conductor checked a brass instrument mounted beside the door. "How long until Lomero?" Mara asked. "An hour." "By which clock?" "By the clock that matters to you." Mara looked at her watch. It had stopped at 12:20, the moment she had boarded. "Mine has stopped. Then it is having a rest." She smiled. The valley widened. Small houses appeared along the slopes, each with one window lit. Some had gardens behind low fences. Others were only stone cottages beneath trees. The train did not stop at any of them. In a field of white stones, small lanterns marked paths that crossed and turned through the snow. "What are those?" Mara asked. "Paths. Where do they lead?" "Home, usually." The answer stayed with her. Soon the lanterns grew farther apart. Snow stopped and stars appeared between the clouds. The conductor placed a folded blanket beside Mara. "You may sleep before Lomero," he said. "I should stay awake." "There are no letters for Lomero." "Then why are we stopping?" "Some stations are part of the line even when nothing is delivered." "Who waits there?" "People who have finished waiting." Lomero stood at the bottom of a shallow basin. Its station was built of dark brick, with broad windows and no lamps on the platform. Every window held a candle. The paired flames made the building look larger than it was. Mara stepped down with the conductor. The platform felt warm beneath her boots, as though a fire burned under the stones. Inside, several people sat at a long wooden table. A woman with silver buttons on her coat smiled. "You are early," she said. "For what?" "For the morning." No one asked Mara's name. They spoke quietly about ordinary things. A roof that needed mending, a garden gone wild, a neighbor who had learned 3 reliable notes on the accordion. Photographs covered the walls. They showed Lomero in different seasons. Children crossed the platform carrying baskets of pears. Yellow flowers covered the hills. The station stood beneath summer rain. "Was the town larger once?" Mara asked. "Yes," said the woman with the silver buttons. "What happened?" "People moved nearer to the roads." "And you stayed?" "Some of us." The woman poured Mara a cup of warm milk. "We stayed because this was where our lives were." The conductor entered. "We leave in 10 minutes." The woman placed a brass key before Mara. "What is this?" "A key to the archive." Mara touched it. "The archive in my town? The archive beneath it?" "I already have a key, not to every room." Mara looked at the woman. "Why give it to me?" "Because the box came from there, and the records belong there." The woman's voice was gentle, but the answer was exact. "Who sent the box?" Mara asked. The woman took one of the silver buttons from her coat and turned it between her fingers. Vale. Mara knew the name. Edda had been the archive keeper before the building became a public records office. Her photograph hung near the reference desk, a severe woman with a braid over one shoulder, dated 1911 to 1956. "My grandmother?" "No, your great-aunt." Mara stared at her. She had never heard of Etta as family. The old family papers had called her a distant cousin who worked among records and never married. She worked for the night line, the woman continued. When the ordinary railway closed, she carried the box to the archive and sealed it behind the Northern Valley maps. She was told that one day the current keeper would hear the bell. Why me? Because you became the keeper. Mara thought of the years she had spent finding misplaced names, repairing torn registers, and refusing to discard records merely because no one had asked for them recently. Etta sent the box to call me. Etta sent it to wait for you. The line called you when the waiting was finished. The conductor stood by the door. Mara closed her hand around the key. What room does it open? A room where the line's records are kept. You will understand when you see it. She wanted to ask about the conductor, but the woman with the silver buttons had already turned toward the candlelit windows. They returned to the platform. As the train moved away, the woman lifted her cup in farewell. The brass key lay warm in Mara's palm. Juniper Vale came after the basin. The railway curved through a stand of juniper trees, and their sharp green scent entered through a gap in the carriage window. At the edge of the valley stood a house with a porch. A woman sat in one rocking chair. Beside her stood another, empty. The train stopped. She carried an old letter in her hand. It was delivered long ago, she said when Mara looked at it. My brother wrote it before he went to the coast. He promised to return when the junipers flowered. Did he? Every year. The woman smiled. He came back once. I was away that day. We found each other later. She looked at the empty chair. There is still time, she said. For what? For sitting. Mara stepped down from the train and sat beside her. The two chairs moved forward and back in the quiet night. Junipers whispered around the house. The lantern on the woman's lap cast light over her hands. He liked the sound of trains, the woman said. So do I. They sat without speaking again. When Mara returned to the carriage, the woman lifted her lantern once. The glow passed over the porch and the empty chair. The train entered the final stretch of the valley. Stillwater, the conductor said. Mara looked at the key. Will the room explain the box? It will. And you, he folded his newspaper. I will explain myself when the journey is complete. The train moved through the thinning dark, carrying Mara and the empty box toward the lake. Stillwater lay beside a lake. Mara knew it before she saw the water. The air changed, carrying a cool mineral scent. The rhythm beneath the wheels softened, as though the track had been laid over earth instead of stone. The train emerged from a grove of birches. A broad lake stretched beyond the platform, perfectly still beneath a thin layer of mist. Lanterns had been placed along the shore, and their reflections made long golden paths across the dark water. The station was small. It had a blue door, a clock without hands, and a bench beneath an awning. A woman in a pale coat waited beside it. The station keeper, the conductor said. She nodded to Mara. You brought the box. It is empty now. That is what empty boxes are for. Inside the station, a stove warmed the room. Shelves held jars filled with buttons, acorns, ribbon, smooth stones, keys, feathers, and pieces of colored glass. A kettle steamed on the stove. The station keeper poured 3 cups. Mara noticed a 4th cup on the shelf. Someone else coming? No. The keeper carried the cup to the window and set it there. There used to be 4 of us, she said. The cup remains because affection does not need a current occupant. She joined them at the table. Have you been to all the stations? Mara asked. Many times. Do they still exist? Yes, even the ones that vanished from maps. Vanishing and ending are not the same thing. The keeper took down a jar of blue buttons. These belong to the night line. Why does the line still run? Because people still write letters, and because some places still need a road that ordinary maps do not provide. Who keeps it running? The keeper glanced toward the conductor. He does. The conductor stood near the door, his hands folded over the top of his walking stick. Mara turned to him. "You said you would explain," he nodded. "My name is Evan Armitage. I was a railway postman before the day line closed. I carried the last official mail over these tracks." He looked toward the lake. When the railway company abandoned the northern route, the towns still had letters. Some were written before the closure. Some were delayed by snow, illness, or grief. Vale asked me to continue carrying them at night. "Did you die?" "No." The answer was so ordinary that Mara almost laughed. "I grew old," he continued. "The line did not. It needed a conductor, so I became one. I keep the timetable, open the doors, carry the boxes, and return passengers who are ready to go home. And the night line? It follows the paths made by years of letters. It runs where a message is still needed, or where a person needs to remember that they belong somewhere. Can it run without you? Not yet. The work passes from one keeper to another when the line is ready." Mara looked at the empty box. "Is that why I was called?" "You were called because you are the current keeper of Edda's archive. You answered because you know what it means to keep something safe while it waits." The explanation did not make the journey smaller. It made it steadier. "Who sent the box?" "Edda," said the station keeper. "She sent it from her last journey in 1956. She placed the completed letters inside, sealed the box, and hid it behind the map. She knew a future keeper would find it when the line needed a carrier again. Why did nobody tell me? No one remembers what they have never been told. That is why the records matter." The conductor reached into his coat and produced a folded ticket. "Your return ticket." Mara took it. Her name was written across the blank paper. "Where will it take me?" "Home." For the first time, the word did not feel like a question. The station keeper carried a tray of 6 pale stones to the lake. Mara followed her along the shore. The mist moved over the water. The opposite bank remained visible through it, a dark line of reeds and trees. The keeper placed the stones one by one along the edge. "Why 6?" Mara asked. "One for each place that received a letter tonight." Mara thought of Bellwether, Alderfin, St. Auras, Low Marrow, Juniper Vale, and Stillwater. The keeper placed the final stone. "The box is empty," Mara said. "It has done what it was sent to do. And the line, it has done what it always does." Mara looked back at the station. Its windows glowed warmly. The train waited beyond the platform, steam rising slowly from the engine. The conductor joined them. "There is one more thing," he said. Mara turned. "The night line is not a secret world separate from yours. It is the part of your world that remains available when ordinary schedules have failed. The stations are real. The people are real. Their distance is real. The line simply keeps faith with them." The words settled over the lake. Mara understood why the letters had felt neither ghostly nor strange. They had been ordinary acts of care, carried long enough to become almost invisible. The train whistle sounded. It was a low note that crossed the water and returned as a softer reflection. The station keeper handed Mara one of the pale stones. "For your desk. What should I write on it?" "Nothing." Mara closed her fingers around it. She climbed aboard. The conductor placed the empty box beside her seat. It looked lighter now, though it had always been empty of weight, only after the letters were gone. As the train began to move, the station keeper stood beneath the blue door. The lake remained visible between the birches, holding the lantern reflections long after the platform disappeared. Mara watched the water until the trees closed around it. The conductor collected the cups. "Do you ever get off?" she asked. "Sometimes. Where do you go? Wherever the line requires. Will you always be the conductor? Until someone else knows the work." He did not look at her when he said it. The train climbed a gentle rise. Beyond it, familiar hills surrounded her town. The clock tower stood among the roofs, its hands approaching 6. The ordinary station came into view. It looked as it always had. Boarded windows, cracked platform, weeds between the rails. The gate stood open. The conductor opened the carriage door. Mara stepped onto the platform. For a moment the station behind her remained lit and whole. The green carriages shone through the steam. Even stood in the doorway with one hand resting on the empty box. "Thank you," Mara said. He nodded. The train began to move. Beyond the ordinary tracks, silver rails appeared in the morning light, then vanished among the linden trees. Mara watched until it was gone. The town was beginning to wake. A baker's van moved along the distant road. Somewhere, a dog barked once. She walked uphill to the archive. The front door was locked, but the brass key turned easily. In the basement, the green-shaded lamp was still burning. Mara placed the pale stone beside it and carried the empty box to the wall of maps. She found the Northern Valley map behind a cabinet of weather journals. The brass key fit a lock hidden beneath its lower frame. Behind the map was a small room. Shelves covered every wall. They held route plans, station ledgers, old railway accounts, bundles of postcards, and boxes labeled with names absent from modern atlases. On the central table lay Etta Vale's ledger. Mara opened it. The first page carried a simple entry. "The nightline continues for as long as someone is willing to carry what has been written." Below it, in Etta's hand, was the date 1956 and a description of the wooden box. "Sent to the archive, not lost. Waiting for the next keeper." Mara turned the page. A second entry named Even Armitage as conductor and keeper of the northern route. The third named Mara Vale. She read the line several times. "Current archive keeper. Called by the bell when the accumulated letters are ready. Trusts the records. Answers." There was no prophecy, no hidden command, and no further instruction. Only a record of work passing carefully from one person to another. Mara closed the ledger. The journey was complete. She returned to the catalog desk, made a cup of tea, and set the pale stone beside the empty box. Outside, morning entered the town one window at a time. After the journey, the archive became quieter. Mara kept working through the day. She answered requests from the town council, found the name of an old footbridge for a schoolchild, repaired a torn ledger, and sorted photographs into boxes marked by year. The hidden room behind the Northern Valley map became part of her ordinary work. She dusted its shelves. She copied Etta's ledger into the current catalog. She placed the route plans beside the station records and the conductor's name beside the timetable. The empty wooden box rested on the central table, its brass clasp closed. Nothing in the room demanded to be solved. The records waited in their rows. At night, Mara sometimes sat there with a blanket over her knees and a cup of tea beside her hand. The pale stone from Stillwater remained on the desk. Its surface was smooth and unmarked. She did not write on it. She no longer needed to. The archive had its daytime sounds. Footsteps above, the turning of keys, the post slot opening, the scrape of a chair across the reading room floor. At night the building breathed differently. Pipes cooled in the walls. The wooden shelves settled. Rain tapped the high windows and moved across the roof. Mara learned to listen without expecting a bell. The first evening after her return, she had kept waiting for the brass note. It did not come. The following evening passed in the same quiet way. By the third, she understood that the line had completed its work. The box had been found. The letters had been delivered. The journey had carried her home. She began to sleep more deeply. In the mornings, she opened the archive before the town had fully stirred. She unlocked the front door, shook the damp from the mat, and lifted the shutters one at a time. Dust rose in the pale light and settled again over the familiar surfaces. She swept the basement steps. She filled the kettle. She trimmed the wick of the green-shaded lamp, though it burned steadily. These were small things, but they gave the hours a shape. A room was kept not by one grand act, but by returning to it and noticing what it needed. She made a list of the hidden room's shelves and copied it into the catalog. Route plans went together by region. Station ledgers were wrapped in brown paper. The postcards were placed in shallow drawers, so their corners would not bend. She added a note to each box in her neatest hand, naming what it contained and where it belonged. At midday, she ate at the desk near the high windows. Sometimes the snow brightened the glass. Sometimes clouds made the room gray. She did not mind either kind of weather. The archive remained warm, and the work remained in front of her. Sometimes, before closing the archive, Mara walked through the hidden room and touched the spines of the ledgers. She remembered Elian's blue lanterns, Peter's green door, the keeper of the alder bridge with her lamp above the river, the clocks of St. Aura's, the candlelit table at Low Marrow, the 2 rocking chairs at Juniper Vale, and the still lake beyond the birches. She remembered the people receiving what they had waited for. No one had made a ceremony of it. They had opened an envelope, held it close, read a page, or waited until they reached home. Their gratitude had been quiet because the letters themselves were quiet. They had only needed to arrive. Mara understood that the nightline carried more than paper. It carried the simple assurance that a voice could cross a long silence. It carried the names of places that roads had forgotten. It carried the patience of people who stayed near their lamps. Most of all, it carried things toward completion. One winter evening, snow began before sunset. Mara finished her work at 9, but she did not leave the archive. She made tea in the basement and sat beside the green-shaded lamp. The snow thickened against the high windows, turning the glass white. On the table, the empty box reflected a narrow line of light. Mara opened it. The cedar lining smelled faintly of the journey. There were no letters inside, no timetable, and no note. Only a few grains of dust had gathered in one corner. She brushed them away with her fingertip and closed the lid. For a while she sat without moving. She looked around the basement. The shelves stood in their familiar rows, their labels pale beneath the lamp. A ledger lay open where she had left it,